All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word. Excuse me. Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study. I'm playing a simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, in which we are talking about the Sermon on the Mount, or this is commonly known as the Sermon on the Mount. It's not so much as a sermon as it is a teaching, where Jesus was, excuse me, if you remember, Jesus had a large crowd had gathered around Jesus, and then Jesus, seeing the crowd, then he began to teach them. He was calling them his disciples, and it seemed like the people in their mind were calling um, calling themselves disciples, or at least acting like disciples. In other words, they were following Jesus around, and so as a result, they were. Um, I think also Jesus wanted to get the. Um, I think he wanted to get their mindset. Okay, that excuse me, that he is. I'm kind of setting my thing up here, guys. I'm still working through my kind of issues. I think it's probably more me than anything else. But anyway, let me get to it. Large crowds that followed Jesus. He had been around Israel, Galilee to the north, Judah to the south, preaching, teaching, healing, healing the sick, casting out devils. So he is known. He's well known. Now people are gathering around him. It is possible that a lot of people think that, or they were trying to get the mindset that he is the Messiah, which is half true. But no, not half true. Stuff like that. It is true he's the Messiah. They just were not calculating his role as the Messiah. They were expecting a king. They were expecting him to, crush the Roman government, and then set up Israel and restore Israel. Well, he kind of tells them that's kind of like half true, in that um, he is the Messiah, but uh, um, if they wanted to be his disciples, here's what they needed to expect. So let me bring this up here, and let's get right to it. Let's get right to it here. All right, here we go. Now, in this, I'm going to go back because I want to read from verse 1, and I want to read from verse 1, and then let's get the full picture in the sense of understanding what Jesus is saying, his thought. So he says, when he saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to teach them, saying, the poor in spirit is blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Those who mourn and bless, for they will be comforted. The gentle are blessed, for they would inherit the earth. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness are blessed, for they will be filled. The merciful are blessed, for they will be shown mercy. The pure in heart are blessed, for they will see God. The peacemakers are blessed, for they will be called the sons of God. Now, one of the things here, as Jesus is now preparing his disciples, Okay, as Jesus is preparing his disciples, understand this, that Jesus is things here as as Jesus is preparing his disciples. The first thing is he prepares their minds, their hearts. He is preparing their character. Okay, so that's the first thing. He's preparing their character. Now, the second thing is that, and by the way, by doing that, and this is going to be very important for what we're getting ready to get into in the next couple of moments, by understanding the character that he's building in us. So, first and foremost, the poor in spirit, right? In other words, we come to God empty so that he can fill us. We are mournful of our sinful state. He comforts us, okay? He strengthens us. And then he goes on and says, then the gentle. Now, understand these qualities for when we get to understanding persecution. Because I hear a lot of Christians that their mindset, their attitudes to me towards how God tells us to face life. And that's important. People think, they kind of downplay that, but, and I'll give you an example. I hear this statement a lot. Well, God tells me to forgive, but I won't forget. Right? You ever heard that statement? Now, the Bible tells us we're going to get into forgiveness later on, but I'm just using that here's a good example. When people say that, well, God tells us to, forgive, but I won't forget. Well, the forget is just another, in your mind, thinking, I'm still not forgiving. Because what does that mean? If you forgive, what does it mean that you won't forget? Well, so what does the not forgetting mean? Now, how does God again tells us to then face life? In other words, as he prepares his disciples to now to go out and face life as his disciples, right? As his disciples, how does he tell us to do this? Well, the first thing he says, these godly characters. So the gentle, right? For they will be blessed. Hungry and thirsting for righteousness. Right there will always keep you centered on God. Not thirsting after man, not thirsting after the latest Christian fad, the latest charismatic, teacher, the latest style of teaching, the latest church model, wanting to be a part of the latest. That's not what he said. Hunger and thirst for righteousness. He says they would be filled. And I'm going to say this. You can't stay in a false teaching. I said this before, that where I to think, how is it that people can be it could be a false teaching and never change, never grow? How do people stay in cults and never grow, never change, never improve in their thinking? Because they're not thirsting and hungering after anything else. That their contentment is what they think they're in. It's good. He says, the merciful are blessed, for they will be shown mercy. The pure in heart are blessed, for they will see God. And this pure in heart will be based upon God's standard of purity, not man's. Notice he said the peacemaker. Now that's, again, this is going to be very important in just a moment. The peacemakers are blessed, for they will be called the sons of God. Now, let's move on to verse 10 when he says, those who are persecuted for righteousness are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. So now we kind of move into what Jesus now is going to say, if you really want to be my disciples. And this was relevant to them. We see in other scriptures that people were ostracized. The Pharisees ostracized people for following Jesus. So when he says those who are persecuted for righteousness are blessed, it doesn't feel like it. Okay? It certainly doesn't feel like it. But as Christians, we are repeatedly told, one, to expect persecutions. Paul goes so far as to say, anyone who lives a godly life will suffer persecution. So it will certainly go to stand that if you're not suffering, if you're not suffering persecution, you're not living a godly life. Now, let me also say this. There is a difference between persecution, or let me put it another way. There is a difference between suffering for your faith. And this suffering here, the persecution, and the term persecution certainly means to be attacked. It's another way of saying being attacked, being bullied, being, um, and this persecution here has an end to what? Stopping the faith, stopping your walk with God, which ultimately is stopping your witness. That's the whole purpose of persecution. And so when you look at the source of persecution, you can go right back to Satan. And the word Satan means adversary. His whole point is to stop your witness. And he will use people, right? So the idea of the primary agents are people. And if you ask a person, why do they hate Christianity? Oftentimes they really can't tell you. There are people, you will see them on YouTube. You'll see them on Facebook that will persecute Christianity. Now they understand, and why? Well, because if you're an atheist, especially if you live in America, you have the Constitution that protects your atheism. So why do you care that I'm a Christian? And then, of course, you will have people then who will then persecute you. They will attack you because of your faith. And you need to understand that the difference between persecution, suffering, and then the trials for one's faith versus or understanding that there are hardships of life. And I hear people sometimes, they will confuse the two. They will say, we all call the suffer, meaning I'm losing my house. Maybe I lost my job. Excuse me. Maybe I lost my job. Life is just going bad. We can even kind of throw in sickness. And those really can be categorized as the hardships of life. In other words, there are many ways that hardships come. You can go all the way back to Adam, that the initial cause of hardship is because Adam sinned, and then the curse came in because of Adam. In other words, all of the hardships, the curse that came in that altered God's paradise. So now you have the laws. I think one of the laws of physics is what? Heat loss. That you instead of if you think about just our human body, why do we die when it is designed to regenerate? And yet every day we grow older and older and older. That's the hardships of life. Okay. And sometimes you could have um sometimes you could certainly suffer hardships because of sin. Mostly, let's say sin in your life. You do something that causes hardship, right? You think of a husband, or a pastor, or anybody, right, that goes out. He commits adultery, then he gets um, AIDS, right, and then he brings that home to his wife. Unbeknownst to her, now she has contracted this STD, this deadly STD, and now she is suffering hardships because of sin. Now, he didn't particularly do that to afflict, okay, but his actions hurt. That's the hardships. Evil men can cause hardships. If you have a evil dictator, and we see it around the world all the time. I won't get into it, but one of the causes of the mass immigration is because people are fleeing the horrible, brutal circumstances in their country. That's hardships. Okay? So those are hardships of life. Sometimes our own foolishness will cause hardships, right? The simple fact that sometimes you may not go to the doctor. Then that not going to the doctor then does what? Not going to the doctor can cause your health conditions to worsen. And to a point, a lot of times the doctors may say, had we caught it earlier. So now you're suffering hardships because, see but that's the hardships of life. Now again, persecution is you're being afflicted because of your faith in Jesus Christ. You're being afflicted because of your faith in Jesus Christ. Two different things right here. Both are bad. And by the way, there is grace for both. God will give you grace. God will give you comfort in both. God will strengthen you to endure both. But keep in mind, because I have seen people have testimonies that will say that, my hardships is we all called to suffer, and well, we all have to endure sometimes hardships. But that's when the Bible talks about this persecution here. He is specifically saying this is the affliction that is a direct result of your faith in Jesus Christ. Look at verse 11. So he says, verse 10 again, those who are persecuted for righteousness are blessed, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. And then he says, you are blessed when they insult you and persecute you. You can say again, afflict, persecute you, and falsely say every kind of evil against you. Look at this. Because of me. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven. For this is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Now, it's kind of interesting because the persecutions the prophets received were from his own countrymen, those who were within the kingdom of God. So, our suffering here, and I want to say this, we should kind of evaluate ourselves as if that we're not, let's say, sharing our faith, if we're not being a witness, especially to avoid persecution. Jesus is telling us, you're going to suffer persecution. You cannot get around persecution. You're going to experience it. You're going to suffer if you live a godly life. People will not like you. And they may not even realize themselves. To me, that's neither here or there. But you're put here to be that witness, and that witness will cause some to persecute you. Notice he says, because of me. All right, guys, we're going to pick this up in the next study here. I am going through slowly the teachings of Jesus here, because they are so relevant for us in our Christian walk. So, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And until the next time, I will see you in the next study.